Contractor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, my lady. Professor Malloy, I'll have some specific topics to cover, but before going back to what you were doing on the Lighthouse project, can you just provide details of separately what you did personally around the development of the lateral flow devices, please?
Thank you. As the inquiry will know, lateral flow came on after the PCR testing had started and was a test for infectiousness as opposed to whether one was infected, and became, as the pandemic went through its stages, the initial test that many of our citizens took. It is an important and vital part of the testing process and the armamentarium that we have as a nation. My responsibility was to chair an industry consortium, which also included PA Consulting, and that was to do a number of things. Number one was to increase manufacturing capacity in the UK from about 200,000 a week to 20 million a week, which we did in the space of around about 6 months. And secondly, it was to develop a supply chain of innovation, of UK invented, UK made tests able to supply the nation as its demands increased. And those were my activities from about September 2020 through until May 2021.
Thank you. The remaining portion of my evidence, I'm going to be focusing back on the Lighthouse laboratories, but I wanted to give you an opportunity if there's anything else you wanted to say about your efforts in respect of the development of the lateral flow devices.
I will say that it's an important part of our preparation to make sure that we have lateral flow ready to go, and it is vital that we maintain a UK manufacturing capacity and a supply chain of invention and innovation through our diagnostic companies to make sure that we have sovereign capability. For if this happens again, we can turn lateral flow on more quickly than we were able to last time.
Thank you. Now, Professor Malloy, my next portion of questioning is all going to be about your involvement in the Lighthouse laboratories. So if we can switch over,
Understood.
Please. Can we then have displayed, please, paragraph 62 of your statement, please, 587344 at page 15. And whilst that's being brought up, I'll start reading it. It'll appear on your screen. In respect to the Lighthouse laboratories, you say this: there was never any intention to replace what the NHS was doing, but rather augment it with discrete, high-quality capacity. The remit here was to do just one thing at an impressive, unprecedented scale. We had to put together a production line that was automated, controlled, process-driven, highly accurate and scalable. It was industrial scale with industrial process tools and industrial quality control. This is exactly what I was asked to do. Now, whilst you say the intention was not to replace what the NHS were doing, were there concerns that this was the case?
I have no doubt that across the community there were concerns that that was the case. But in terms of the supply of our instrumentation, in terms of our willing, and that was from an academic call out, not an NHS one. We also used a Thermo Fisher test. The NHS at the time was using primarily a Roche-based test, and we tried as hard as we could to make sure that we did not cannibalize the supply chains there. And in fact, in the early days of the Lighthouse program, when our capacity was relatively low, and we were asked by the NHS to supply some of our inventory of plasticware and materials, we did so very happily. So I do understand that there will be, and there remain, misunderstandings about what the Lighthouse was for and how we acted. What we were for was to augment, and how we acted was to run in parallel with NHS advice.
Thank you. That can be removed from the screen, but we'll be moving in a moment to paragraph 85. But just picking up on what you've just said about the Thermo Fisher and what we touched upon around the lifting of those devices from universities and other venues, can I ask you, Essentially, the Lighthouse laboratories were largely dependent on essential and key testing equipment borrowed from universities and research institutes. And was that appreciated when you took on the task?
Yes, very much. It was massively appreciated. And not only was it appreciated that we had the material to go and do our job, but these bits of kit used to turn up with Post-it notes on them, wishing us luck. And so I think the language here is really important, and the purpose here is really important. These weren't lifted; they were volunteered. Okay, they weren't commandeered, and they were gifted in some cases with intense generosity, and then they were returned either as that bit of kit. Cleaned and decontaminated, or a new piece of kit back to that academic organisation or private sector organisation in the summertime of 2020.
Thank you. Now, if we could display paragraph 85, just to expand upon the involvement of the team from Deloitte, please. You say as part of your coordination role, you were given access to a small group of Deloitte staff.
Yes.
And so can you just help us understand who gave you access to the team, how many the team comprised of, and perhaps if you can cover it in the same roll-up questions, your general views and impressions of the support Deloitte provided to you.
So, as I said earlier on, the Deloitte team, which was deployed at the Department of Health and Social Care, carried out a wide range of different tasks, only some of which I actually touched on or touched me. There was a team resident at the UK Biocentre at Milton Keynes, and there were individuals from the Deloitte team who were allocated to help me in my role. And who then acted as site-by-site coordinators back into the Deloitte group for management information on a daily basis and so on. Some of the most useful things here were around demand forecasting. It was one of the major challenges that we had, trying to understand where demand would fall on any given day. And it was the Deloitte team who helped us very much understand where tomorrow was likely to be because of their involvement with the regional test centres and others, which we had no direct involvement with, but we were the recipients of. So the Deloitte team was very much the broker of information between the Lighthouse team, on a daily basis and often on an hourly basis, and the rest of the program. I was given access to the Deloitte team by Pillar 2 management, and used an array of that group over the weeks that I was involved.
Thank you. And then can I ask you from your impression, and particularly as to the volume of contractors or supporters from Deloitte at Alderley Park? The inquiry heard some evidence last week from Professor McNally as to his impression in the early days of the volume of contractors there at the time he worked there. Did you have any views on the numbers or whether there are excessive numbers of Deloitte contractors that have been seconded to Alderley Park?
Each site had its own different needs. In terms of build, warehousing, and so on. Alderley Park had a relatively small requirement for that skill set, as we had a large number of individuals on that site, particularly. And I'd like to extend my thanks to the AstraZeneca group, who leaned in really strongly and provided a lot of the access to skills and material that was not present at the Milton Keynes site. And therefore, there's somewhat of a balance in that.
Understood, but I think to balance from the evidence as to how things operated, and so noting that you had the AstraZeneca lean in, can you give us some impression at a high level as to numbers from Deloitte contractors that would be there?
I don't know how many contractors were at Milton Keynes specifically.
Thank you. Now, the next paragraph of your statement, please, briefly, just some clarification. At paragraph 86, you say that you reported to Pillar 2 at a minimum daily.
Yes.
So who specifically were you reporting to, and how practically did you report during the time when you were the coordinator?
So initially, as I put in my statement here, to Kristen McLeod, who was at that time running Pillar 2. I used to report daily in a written form to across all of the Lighthouse labs and to Kristen and colleagues to make sure that everyone knew how the build was going. It was really important. And Kristen would also provide me with access to what the program wanted of me. and of us in terms of build capacity, give some horizon scanning of where the programme may wish to use the Lighthouse Lab. So it was very interactive. It was very data rich, and I think you've seen that probably from the extraordinary number of communications that occurred just in that first week. So it was highly engaged, highly interactive communication with Pillar 2, and then Alex Cooper, who replaced Kristen McLeod, ran that programme.
Thank you. That can be removed from the screen, please. Now, can I ask you your broad views and impression as to approach to mass testing on a centralised basis? Did you then, and now looking back, can you assist us to your reflections on the value of a more localised approach for testing?
Yeah, and I appreciate this. This is an area for great debate and some controversy. There is a balance to be had between a highly distributed, fast twitch type of response of using many individual small laboratories and the larger scale approach. As you have already been through with me today, in order to set up that large scale approach, we needed access to NHS data bridging. We needed to make sure that we had appropriate supply chains of material, instruments, and so on, and a consistency of approach which gave quality at its core. That was hard enough with 4 laboratories. With 400 or more, and taking into account that we were absolutely clear that we got NHS validation before we did any clinical testing. It is important, therefore, to note that whilst a distributed set of laboratories may offer fast twitch, it does not necessarily. So a fast twitch-based response to something that happens very readily and rapidly. However, the ability for all of those laboratories to go through the NHS validation back-to-back that we did to make sure that they were connected with the NHS data systems and so on would have been legion.
But I think you're assuming, Professor, that the argument was that you didn't need mass testing. I think the argument from Sir Paul Nurse and I've forgotten the name of the other gentleman.
Professor McNally.
Professor McNally, that's it. Was that essentially you do need mass testing, but what you also should do is utilise local infrastructure and skills and all the rest of it whilst you build
there's an argument for
sites.
that. Yeah.
And then you transfer the equipment and everything else, having utilised in the early days of pandemic, when containment is so important, the local infrastructure. That's the argument. Not that you didn't need. I haven't heard an argument you didn't need mass testing sites, but that's the argument that Sir Paul Nurse and Professor McNally were advancing.
And I think you can consider it in a phasic way. I mean, the transfer of actual physical instrumentation does require time. Physical time to move things, to decontaminate, to bring them back up. If you like, it's like putting the clutch in. You don't get that full power all the way through. So that handover point would have been critical. You couldn't go and buy new instruments. Instruments were not available anywhere in the world. So this was a case of literally the number that we had on this island. So there is a good argument for that phasing, but it's just understanding the constraints in that the quality and the consistency would not have been the same in that very first and early phase as you would have had and we delivered as part of the Lighthouse approach. And I think the inquiry's just got to understand the relative trade-offs of those two things.
Sorry to pursue the point.
Not at all.
Is consistency as important as just getting the tests done? Which is what Sir Paul Nurse is saying. That if you're getting the tests done, then things like consistency and whatever can come later.
I think it's a fair argument. Having been on the recipient of criticism on consistency, I'm not sure that argument would necessarily have held.
Consistency is obviously important because you need to be able to rely upon.
That's exactly right. And that's where we worked very hard with our NHS colleagues to make sure that our results were consistent with theirs. I'm not sure that that was as possible with a highly distributed set of laboratories running separate tests under separate conditions with separate instrumentation and separate reagents. But I do understand that. I do understand the point and that need for speed.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all, my lady. Can I ask, for when you had that oversight role, was there any consultation or engagement with local community organisations, networks or leaders to ensure that the approach to testing was suitable to a diverse range of communities?
Our job in the lighthouse was to provide capacity for national demand. It was not to define where that demand was drawn from. We did have all of the local lighthouse communities were engaged, whether it was in the University of Manchester and the Greater Manchester Health Authority or in Glasgow or elsewhere. But the demand that we supplied was the national programmes demand from wherever in the nation it deemed it right for us to work.
Thank you. Can I ask you, you've been provided as part of, I think, the evidence pack, the statement to Professor Costello, who provides the opinion that the 44, I think, virology labs in the United Kingdom were underused in April 2020. Do you have any views in respect of that position of Professor Costello?
I don't have any data for the use of Pillar 1 facilities during that. That was not my concern. My concern was building to the national demand that I heard through Pillar 2. But I naturally would have expected, and my understanding was that the Pillar 1 infrastructure was being fully utilised.
Thank you. Now, I've already asked you about data, and you've told me about the data link, but it may short-circuit a question. Did you have any role to analyse the data that was being generated from the testing?
Well, the Lighthouse Labs analysed the experimental data to provide either positive or negative, but beyond that point, we were not analysing national data, regional data, or so on. We had no ability to do that, precisely because all of our samples were anonymous.
Thank you.
We didn't know from where they were or who they were.
Thank you. And so essentially, you had no access to evidence or data about demographics or anything like that?
Absolutely none.
Thank you. Can I ask you then to please, can we have displayed your paragraph 96, please, briefly? Now, you detail in paragraph 96 that the key constraints in the national testing programme, including demand forecasting, essentially trying to predict and manage the number of tests that would be taken by the population at any one time or place and the variables affecting that. Did you know whether that took into account geographical and ethnic disparities?
I do not.
Thank you. Now, can I then, next as a topic, and appreciating that there's emails that have been provided in the pack and documents as to, certainly in the early stage of the setup of the laboratory at Alderley Park, and I think from some of the reports, the early days overview inspection reports, identify a number of issues around the testing itself. And so I'm going to deal with them without the underpinning emails and the like, but I'm going to summarise the issues as follows. We have seen that there's correspondence about different sample tube sizes, different shaped tubes, barcode stickers being used as sealants around the tube. And so in terms of those sorts of issues, can you help understand? We've obviously got some emails that suggest that there was an issue as to the quality of how the samples were provided and issues of multiple barcodes that then would result in a sample being voided.
Yep.
And there are other quality issues identified in the materials that's been provided to you in terms of, in particular, I think, swabs being sealed in Asda supermarket bags and other poor quality issues. And I appreciate they're just some emails, but can I have your overview evidence about the quality and the processes that were achieved at the Lighthouse Lab, or what you had to engage with to perhaps deal with those quality issues, please, as a topic?
Thank you. if you're developing what was in effect a data manufacturing facility, you rely very much upon the quality of and the consistency of your inputs. And we, at the very early stage, placed it to Pillar 2 a specification for what the tube should look like, what the swab should look like, how much transfer material should be in it. Every single lighthouse lab had a wall of almost of the variety of these that actually came through the door on any given day, from any given location and from any given supply chain. We all realized, let's be clear, that there was a global fight for plasticware and swabs and so on. However, it probably the variety of tubes that came in and the state that they came in with probably reduced our capacity by 30 to 40% on any given day. And some of that was rectified through training at individual regional test centres, and there's a good volume of data to show of the variety of void rates by test centre, many of which were just to do with simple packing and presentation of these tubes, so that we could use them in an efficient way. It was a massive issue for productivity. It was a large issue for quality, and it became, because of in some cases, tube leakage, an issue of safety for those volunteers and workers at Lighthouse Labs.
Thank you. Can we look at just one of those emails that are in the category of issues flagged as to quality?
Of course.
It's please INQ 510907. That's 510907. Thank you. And if we can go to the bottom of the page, please, on page 1. This is an email from Professor Dame Sue Hill, Chief Scientific Officer, where we can see following the visit, and I think this was in fact the Milton Keynes site of the 28th of March 2020, but I ask you about that because you're still in the oversight role at this point. Yes. Plainly indicating that it was a very manual process at that time in March 2020, with risks that needed to be urgently mitigated, systems and processes needed to be improved across the whole end-to-end pathway, and that the staffing expertise needed more experienced staff. And then if we scroll up, please, I think we see your response at 3:13. I think, broadly speaking, that you indicated that the measures were discussed, understood and accepted. And I think you also confirm in that email exchange that many of the optimisation steps identified by her were in plan but not yet in place. And so what I want to ask you as a broad topic, would those optimising steps have been in place and operational in pre-existing labs?
Some, but not all. Some of those were the implementation of large-scale automation systems, which were not needed in very small labs. So there are some really important points in here. One, that this is highly engaged with the NHS. Secondly, call-outs for staff with the Institute of Biomedical Scientists and so on, that demonstrates that we were both asking for and receiving advice from the NHS throughout. But let's also remember this is day 10 of a 700+ day programme. And it's absolutely to be expected that somebody coming, and this was prior to clinical testing having been executed, prior to the NHS formal evaluations of sites. So this was absolutely right that qualified and experienced people came in and pointed out where we needed to do things, and they were done.
Thank you. Now, I think the response also addresses issues of staffing. You talk about streamlining the process and building confidence in the workforce who are research scientists rather than seasoned clinical lab operatives. Again, would there have been those seasoned clinical lab operatives in university and other labs across the United Kingdom?
I think the issue here was more people coming from NHS clinical labs. And that was the point that I was making here, and that our approach both to health and safety and to sample handling took a hyper-cautious approach by those folks who did not routinely deal with clinical samples. And some of the slowness, perhaps, and the deliberateness that was being picked up here was because of that. And so we encouraged, accepted, and welcomed any input from NHS clinical staff, which we had. And those members of the Institute of Biomedical Scientists who came and joined us, who gave that to us too.
Thank you. And then just finally, before I'll briefly ask you about recommendations, you've had provided to you an article that was published in October 2020 that included a joint investigation between the BBC and with commentary from Dr. Julian Harris. I'm not going to ask for it to be displayed, but for the transcript, it's INQ 228145. Had you any oversight role at that point? We know that you've moved on, so you can't really assist as to practices at that time.
Not at that time.
Thank you.
And not at that place.
And then finally, please, I think to crystallise that you have never taken part or been invited to any lessons learning exercise in respect of your involvement in the national testing programme.
No.
But you do provide a large degree of recommendations within the statement, and the statement will be published that contains all the details, lessons learning, reflections. But can I ask you to touch upon, I think, just two topics by way of recommendations that perhaps may assist her ladyship as by way of expansion, and perhaps under the topic, first of all, of space?
Yes. We would have been much faster had we had space to move into and move our people into and move the process into. Probably 4 to 6 weeks, I think, of difference it would have made had we had that space. And the space is gone. And as I put it in the statement and elsewhere, I think the safety light is out. And that's something that I think would affect us if we had another pandemic. We would have to find that space again. And that would be inappropriate. And it is possible to keep those spaces working on peacetime activities and have them able contractually to be taken over for pandemic-based activities. And I'd recommend that.
Thank you. And I think also perhaps if I highly summarise some of the topics you've identified in the recommendations in the last part of your statement, I think the need for a plan is also something that seems to come out strongly. Yeah. Is there anything further you'd wish to detail about the need for a plan, which may seem fairly obvious, but that assists her ladyship as to your views on recommendations?
Each different pandemic will come with a different plan, but we need to have a pandemic plan that we can not necessarily just pull off the shelf. It has to be more alive than that. We have to have regular war rooms, not workshops, which involve NHS and industry and academia, so that everybody knows what the first 50 phone calls need to be. This is about action, and this is about understanding what the nation can give as it leans in. It instinctively lent in last time, and people gave of themselves, financially, organisationally, time-wise. They moved from wherever they were with the relative safety of lockdown into these labs to work hard on behalf of other people, and the state cannot rely on that as a plan. We need those war rooms regularly with that combination of NHS, academia and industry to understand who can give what, who's going to be able to provide what and where. If we have that, then the next person who has the chair that I had 5 years ago will have somewhat of an easier run in, and the nation will have a faster twitch response for high capacity laboratories, because it does need to be remembered that this combination of NHS, academia and industry provided something that the UK should be extraordinarily proud of, and has provided a generation of scientists with training, experience and the opportunity to serve their nation. And if I needed any respite through the difficult times here, and it was far difficult for others, but I used to walk around some of the lighthouse labs, and young people with their arms in safety hoods who'd been there for 6 or 7 hours doing the same job over and over would thank me for giving them the opportunity to serve. And I think the inquiry needs to hear that, and I hope you celebrate it.
Those are my questions. Thank you, Professor Malloy, and you have been heard.
Just a couple more questions from Ms. Mirage.
Professor Malloy, I'm
Yes.
Talia Mirage,
Hi.
and I ask questions on behalf of the COVID bereaved families. Just a couple of questions from me, really, touching on the topic of the management of the Lighthouse Labs.
Yeah.
And you were very helpfully taken to a brief timeline of your involvement in the oversight role of the labs between March
Yes.
and July of 2020.
Yeah.
And is it that it was up to the end of July?
Yes.
When Dame Dominic took
Dominicek
took over. And from August 2020, you told us that you moved on to CEO role, maintaining overall responsibility and accountability for Alderley Park
Correct.
Lighthouse Lab. Now, if you could assist us, please, with the management and staffing levels, if you can,
Yes.
of the Lighthouse Lab network in the period early August, appreciating that you left at the end of July. We have an observation from Sir Patrick Valance's diary, which references the management of the Lighthouse Labs in this term. People changing all the time. For example, no one knows who actually is in charge of Lighthouse Lab. And that entry is made in Sir Patrick's diary on the 6th of August, 2020. And just for the record, it's INQ 000280061. I'm not going to bring it up. So bearing that comment, an diary entry in mind, and that timeline, having regard to your involvement up to the end of July, and appreciating that your role was a coordinating one up to the end of July, can you assist us with this? Was there a high rate of staff turnover in the Lighthouse Lab network up to early August of 2020?
Well, Lady, I apologise for interrupting my learned friend. I don't actually think the Rule 10 permission was granted by reference to that document, so I raised by way of completeness because of the sensitivities that apply to Sir Patrick Valance's diaries, but plainly it's a matter for you, my lady, but I raised because it's not been given a Rule 10 permission for a question to be asked on that foundation.
None of Ms Mirage's introduction had permission. So the question for which there's permission, and therefore we don't need to refer to that document again. The question was there a high rate of staff turnover?
When the first lockdown was ended, there was a very obviously we had volunteers running sort of manning or staffing the lighthouse. Now they went back to the jobs that they were being then paid for, and it was a requirement on the Lighthouse Labs, which we foresaw from June, to go from a full volunteer workforce onto something that had a bit more of a longer term standing. And we needed to hire on each site around about 100 people per week. That means identification, that means sifting, that means interviewing, that means competencies, that means onboarding, that means supervision, and so on. All the way through until the September, October, November time. That was so yes, there was. As lockdown finished, we needed to completely change our workforce. At the management level, there was relatively little change. I moved on, and Anna, who was the sponsor for the Glasgow site, moved into my role, and the Pillar 2 management team stayed the same. But yes, there was, inevitably, as lockdown ended and volunteering ended, we needed a completely different set of staff. So it was a gargantuan activity, a mammoth activity through that summer as we bulked up each site and made other changes to the efficiency of the site to prepare ourselves for September, when there was another significant pulse of activity.
Thank you, Professor Malloy. My apologies in relation to the prefacing, my lady, and I think that the answer given deals with what would have been the follow-up.
Thank you, Ms Raj. I'm afraid I was making a point that applies not just to you but to others. When I give permission for a question, it's the question, not a lengthy introduction, for which I have not given permission. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Professor Malloy, that concludes all the questions that we have you rightly recognised in your evidence here today the role played by the volunteers in the lighthouse laboratories, and you go into more detail in your written statement that will be published. And I entirely endorse what you said. I don't know if you've heard the comments I've made before about the unsung heroes, the unsung COVID heroes. This country wouldn't have got through but for the unsung heroes, and so you rightly mentioned those who played their part in laboratories, and I'm sure you were one of them, and I'm sure you did need the respite, even if you perhaps underplayed the need for some respite occasionally. I doubt you got very much. So thank you for everything you did and your colleagues did, and thank you for your help for the inquiry.
Thank you all very much. Thanks, my lady.
Thank you. Well, lady, I think there's a short break and then we'll be starting.
I think we're going to go straight in. I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. Unless there's any reason not to.
No, there would be no reason.
Thank you.
Could I ask if Mr. Cook could stand as he takes the oath, please?
I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God
That the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Sorry to keep you waiting, Mr. Cook. I see you've been sitting in the hearing room watching anyway. I hope you haven't been waiting for too long.
Not at all, my lady.
Thank you. Could you please tell the inquirer your full name?
Dominic Charles Jonathan Cook.
Thank you. Mr. Cook, you provided a corporate witness statement on behalf of Deloitte. It's dated the 15th of May 2025, please. And can we turn to page 105, where we see the statement of truth? And can I ask you to confirm that the content of that statement is true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, it is.
And perhaps whilst the statement's there, it's right, isn't it, that you've also a number of significant appendices to the statement that give some great amount of detail about those involved in the various contracts, the nature of the different contracts, to perhaps provide the fullest possible detail also in the appendixes as to Deloitte's involvement?
Yes, we started preparation for this back in 2023.
Thank you. Can we then please get your details and background, please? It's right, isn't it, that you are a partner in the major programmes team at Deloitte?
That's correct.
That prior to moving to Deloitte in November of 2017, you were a qualified lawyer practising at a law firm for 26 years.
Correct, yes.
And you have held various management roles during that time. But significantly, during COVID, you were the Deloitte risk partner across a number of Deloitte COVID-19 engagements with particular focus on the national testing programme.
That is correct, and it's, I should add that my area of expertise in the law firm was on the resetting of broken major projects. So I have a major projects background, and I've also taught that up at Oxford Side Business School as an associate fellow there.
Thank you. Now, you've already identified the audit and accountancy background. I think that's perhaps the main business of Deloitte. But are you able to assist and perhaps give the context as to why it was Deloitte were approached and then indeed did take forward assisting with the national testing programme?
Certainly. I'm not sure, if I may, I would characterise it as the main business of Deloitte. Deloitte has some 27,000 people. About 10 and a bit thousand are engaged in the audit and accountancy. The other 10, so a significant part, are on the consulting and advisory side. And it is on the consulting and advisory side that we were first contacted because of the breadth of the services that we could bring to bear.
Thank you. And perhaps it's right to detail that you've set out within your witness statement the multidisciplinary advisory and consultancy services that are provided at Deloitte, but also the diverse expertise and workforce capacity that exists in the major programmes healthcare, but also the role Deloitte Digital have that's of relevance to setting up the programme. And so, sorry.
Yes, sorry, that's correct. Although day one, we were not asked to support on the digital side of things. That came very rapidly afterwards, but day one, we were not asked to support.
Thank you. Could you maybe just keep your voice up a little? I know you've got a sore throat, so it might seem artificial, but if you could slightly raise your voice, it might help.
Certainly, I can be louder.
Thank you. Well, then, can you perhaps deal with and give an overview in the knowledge that the full detail is within the witness statement, to start with as to the initial contact? And perhaps we should have in front of you paragraph 41 that deals with the initial contact with Lord Bethel and the Department for Health and Social Care, please.
Certainly. We were first contacted, actually, by the chairman of Barclays, Nigel Higgins, who asked us if we would be interested in helping the DHSC and supporting the DHSC on the national testing. We understand that a conversation had first taken place between Nigel Higgins and Lord Bethel, and that Lord Bethel had asked Nigel Higgins for his advice as to an organisation that may be best placed to assist the government. Deloitte had worked for Barclays in the past, so I assume the link was made there.
Thank you. And perhaps if we can move down to paragraph 43, just so we have the dates of the contact, please. If we could just go down to page 43. Thank you. Your statement helpfully tells us that 2 calls took place on the evening of the 18th of March, the first with Lord Bethel and the second with representatives from number 10 Downing Street, including William Waugh and Kristen McLeod. You say on the Deloitte side, the calls were attended by Mike Standing, Sarah Siegel, Rob Parker and Nick Owen. And we can see the detail of what was asked, but perhaps from the best summary that you can give, what was asked of Deloitte at that time and what did Deloitte go on to do, please, to assist the national testing programme?
Certainly. On that initial call on the 18th, it was more a test by those calling us about the capability and capacity within Deloitte, which is why we had those individuals that you've just outlined, who between them represented the head of our life sciences business, the head of our healthcare business, the head of our major programs business, and Nick Owen, who was at the time the chair of Deloitte.
Thank you. And we perhaps my summary, but we can see that at paragraph 44, you detail essentially that the government was passing on the message that the NHS was under extreme pressure.
That is correct, and that there was a requirement to have a completely separate testing system set up in the UK.
Thank you. Now, I'm not going to go back to paragraph 30C because I want to follow on from here, but you tell us in paragraph 30C that it was passed on that the programme had to be built virtually from scratch, independent from the existing NHS infrastructure, which was not deemed suitable by the government for national testing at a scale due to being fragmented in nature and already under intense pressure in early 2020 due to the emergence of the pandemic. And so when the ask was coming of something to be created from scratch, was it any part of Deloitte's role to question or understand why it was starting a system from scratch, or what else existed to create a system for testing?
We understood that the capacity of the NHS at the time was in the region of 5,000 tests a day, and that the NHS was severely stretched at the time, and therefore it needed that capacity for itself, thereby underscoring the need for a completely separate national testing system.
And can I perhaps with you explore something that's detailed throughout your statement about the role of Deloitte? I don't think you'll need to go to the document just for the moment, Mr. Cook. You describe in a number of places that Deloitte were the how rather than my summary, the decision maker. Is that perhaps a fair summary of the Deloitte position?
Yes, I would perhaps phrase it slightly differently. We were the how, not the what or the why. The how relates to the operationalizing of the requests that were made of us. The what and the why really relates to the strategy and the decisions that were made elsewhere. Perhaps a good example, which we may come on to, I do not know, is how do we get the students home for Christmas? Our response to that was to work out the operationalizing of that, the answer to that question, and many others.
Thank you. Can we then look at the briefing document that was provided to give some context to the requests that were being made? It's the INQ please 00055 Thank you. And I think this is a briefing document we've not yet heard evidence about. I think Lord Bethel will tell us a little bit about it. But is it correct that this was the request and the context that was being made of Deloitte at that time as to what the government wished to achieve? And perhaps we just scroll down. Thank you.
Yes.
So essentially, for Deloitte to assist increasing the lab-based testing capacity from 5,000 to 25,000 per day.
That was in relation to the NHS. I think one of the paragraphs a little further down really relates to the creation of the mass testing and the need for a much more scalable system.
If we scroll down, we should see this, and we'll be exploring this document with Lord Bethel. Thank you. And there we go. Urgent and specific antigen testing for protecting frontline staff. And then further down at bullet point 3, mass market testing for ordinary people using pregnancy test style pinprick blood tests. And then if we could scroll down again just to complete this document, extend our national mass population surveillance. Thank you. And so having received that briefing document, can we move back to your witness statement, please, and take up the chronology at your paragraph 47, please, Mr. Cook. That could be displayed, please, on the screen. So that's INQ, thank you, INQ 587306, thank you very much.
Yes, this would be the 19th of March, so the day following those phone calls, when a number of the Deloitte partners representing the range of disciplines I've just touched upon all attended at Victoria Street, the DHSC headquarters.
Thank you. And then if we can scroll down to the next paragraph, please, paragraph 48. You can see there that it was made clear by the Department of Health and Social Care that their overall mission was for testing and initial ideas of DHSC about how to approach scaling up testing. And we can see that it was to look at, expand on this meeting and topics discussed, but also the overall mission and initial ideas for how to approach scaling up, with a number of other private contractors being referenced, and also for the engagement of Deloitte. So we can see the summary there, but can you sort of detail how, following on from the 19th of March, what Deloitte had been asked to do and what Deloitte went on to do, please?
Yes. The quote-unquote business problem that we were given was, how do you create a mass testing capability throughout the UK whilst protecting the NHS? We understood that the government had already contracted with some suppliers, Amazon, Boots, Thermo Fisher and the like, and we were asked to work with those partners in order to come up with a plan to develop a national testing program. It's at this stage I ought to emphasize excuse me, that Deloitte's involvement, although this module is test, trace and isolate, we were very, very heavily weighted on, deliberately so, on testing, and indeed only had one minor engagement on each of trace and isolate.
Thank you. I think with you making that point clear, perhaps if we can just clarify, in terms of the other individual private contractors that we see named here, did Deloitte have any role in the identification of those to whom the government had also decided they wanted to procure their services as part of the national testing programme?
No, we didn't. They were all contracted in, or contacted at least, before our involvement.
Thank you. And then you've just indicated that whilst you had a role for testing, I think you're clarifying that Deloitte had a very limited role in respect of contact tracing.
Yes, and that was a deliberate decision on the part of Deloitte to keep it like that.
Thank you. Can I then ask for your comment and clarification the inquiry had some evidence in Module 5 from Lord Agnew, who talked about the numbers of individuals who essentially were performing the task of contact tracing at call centres with numbers of 25,000 or like, and essentially about 15% of that number of contact tracers really being utilised efficiently. I think it was said that Deloitte were responsible for that contract and the contact tracing. Can you clarify, is that correct?
It is incorrect. We had no hand in the setting up of that call centre, or indeed this was the track and trace call centre that was let to Citel and Serco, nor did we have a hand in either of those contracts. So I can only assume Lord Agnew misremembered.
Thank you. And so you said a limited role. So can we just clarify then, in terms of us being test, trace and isolate in Module 7, we're going to look at what you did to support the testing programme, but in terms of other things that Deloitte did, and I know there's a detail and a schedule about the different contracts, but can you just summarise at a high level to assist with the context of the evidence we're going to come on to, as to the other things that Deloitte assisted with, please?
Yes, as regards the small element in trace, we were asked to develop an inquiries, feedback and complaints platform so that citizens could ring 119 and do what it says on the tin, make inquiries, give feedback and make complaints about TTI type activities. We created the platform and then we handed it over to the DHSC. We had no access to any of the call data or information relating to the then ongoing running of that platform.
Thank you.
Before you go on, can I just go back to timing, Mr. Cook? It may be that, being discreet as I'm sure you are, you probably won't want to answer this question, but we'd ended community testing on the 12th of March, yet they don't contact Deloitte's, whoever's going to put this mass testing system into operation, until the 19th?
18th was the initial contact.
Principle, surely, of major programmes is, if you're going to need them urgently, get them underway as a matter of urgency.
Slight nuance. We'll get the planning of it underway, get the preparation underway. I would agree with that, yes.
Did anybody say at that first meeting as to what steps they'd taken to get mass testing underway? You knew about the contracts with Boots, Amazon and
Thermo Fisher.
Thermo Fisher. Did they tell you how they were going to do mass testing? Everybody knew that we had to test.
I think, my lady, that was the exam question put to Deloitte. How? How are we going to do this? It was put to us what needed to be achieved. I do not think, well, I know there was not a plan at the time on how it could be achieved.
Did you detect any thinking, even if there wasn't a concrete plan? Had there been any thinking before they came to you?
I must assume yes, my lady, because the contract with Thermo Fisher related to type of testing, test kits and the like. So there must have been some, at least embryonic thinking in that direction. But I have no first-hand knowledge of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cook, I'm going to display the helpful table you've provided in your witness statement at page 13 of INQ 3806, yes, thank you, to just give the overview of the different areas where Deloitte assisted. Now, perhaps in doing so, can you just clarify for her ladyship's benefit? I think fundamentally you described the streams of work as falling under either the cube aspect or the Tesseract. Can you just first of all describe what cube is and then give us a summary of Tesseract, please?
Certainly. Cube was the internal Deloitte name given to our mainstream testing activity, by which I mean everything related to testing bar that of a digital nature. Tesseract picked up on everything of a digital nature, which came along about a week or so later after we were first instructed on the broader cube national testing related subject matter.
Thank you. Then we can see below that also the stream of work as to the COVID-19 PMO support with the client of NHSX and providing a service team to support NHSX in the domain of project and portfolio management. Did that relate to the NHSX app?
No, it was a broader PMO project management office support across a range of NHS-X activity. It is probably worth saying, though, there may well be, or there are 8 entries in this table. I would say 90+% of our activity related to the first 2 entries.
Thank you. Well, perhaps we'll just scroll down to show it, and I won't ask anything else about the other topics. If we could just move down, please, but just so they're seen. And over the page, please. But just to give some context, and again, the statement that we've published has the schedules attached also. So can we go back up then, please? Having identified the Tesseract, thank you, to 2, thank you. You've already headlined that the work stream to assist with digital solutions came on later than the testing. And so what were the digital solutions Deloitte were asked to assist with, please?
If I may just take a slight step back, when we were asked about the national testing, it was very clear that we would not be able to get to a scalable solution in the pace that the country required unless there was a very considerable digital underpinning of the system. So effectively, how do you track the digital journey from the time a citizen picks up the phone to book a test, where they are going to get tested, how they are going to be identified, how that test then goes to the lab, how the lab then gets it into what we heard earlier in the evidence, this NPEX, which is a national pathology exchange owned by the NHS, and then that information not only back to the citizen, but into the broader NHS machinery for which to make informed decisions, and indeed on that individual's GP record.
Thank you. The table can be removed from the screen, thank you. Now, you have helpfully provided a 168 plan that I think in some granular detail gives assistance as to the streams of work that Deloitte were involved in, and we're going to look at it together in a moment. But before doing that, that is dated June of 2020, but thank you for providing also, I think, the earlier iteration that fed into that broader piece of work. And can I ask very briefly for that to be displayed, just for you to give overview evidence in relating to the draft end-to-end process that has the date of the 25th of March 2020, and it's INQ 587598, please. Now, as the Ladyship's already identified, the ask came in on the 18th of March, meetings that followed on the 19th. And by the 25th of March, is it right that Deloitte had created a draft of an end-to-end process that was the start of the thought process around how to deliver or contribute to the testing programme?
That is correct. So from the 19th, a day after the phone call, we had a small team that landed in Victoria Street with the DHSC. And so by the 25th, we had an initial thinking, that's what this document was, which evolved into the one I think you're about to take me through, as to how do you create a national testing capability.
Thank you. And with the assistance, please, can we just move through the slides? Because I'm not going to spend time. We'll look at what then became the plan, the end-to-end plan. But again, it just gives some idea as to the thought process as to how you would assist the end-to-end process. If we could just keep moving through, please, because it's helpful to look at this as to how it evolved into the 168-day plan. Is there anything, Mr. Cook, thank you, you wish to say by way of a high-level overview about where you got to by the 25th of March, speaking to this document, please?
Yes, I think we found it very helpful to break the activity needed into citizen flows, logistics flows, and indeed data flows, which then led into analysis. So breaking it down into bite-sized chunks was very helpful. And it was during this period that Deloitte Digital, through a team that had just been made available by virtue of another client standing it down, developed a proof of concept to show to NHSX and DHSC how you would need to track a citizen from the phone call to the test centre, give the QR code, and eventually the front-end IT, so to speak, that would speak to the back-end IT after the lab had done the test and uploaded the test results by virtue of the barcode to the NHS. And then there was which we'll go through, a marrying up of that barcode to the original QR code. So back end and front end then spoke to each other in the NHS MPEG system.
Thank you. We'll look at the end-to-end approach that is the June one, but perhaps, sorry, could that just be displayed just one moment? Because I think we can see, I do apologise for confusion. Can we just display again the draft from the March, because I think it's helpful on the screen that we just displayed. Thank you. And we'll see this picked up in the bigger document. You can see that there's essentially 4 streams. We've got the green Thermo Fisher kit stream, the blue NHS stream, then the digital platform stream, and the Randox stream.
Correct.
And so this is quite helpful, and then we'll, for reasons that will be apparent to everyone else in a moment when we go to the 158 plan. Can you just help a ladyship with why there's a Thermo Fisher kit stream and then the Randox stream at the bottom, please?
Yes. As I mentioned, Thermo Fisher, excuse me, Thermo Fisher had already been contracted by the DHSC to provide its own test capacity and test kits. And they were different to the Randox test kits. Randox operated what was known as a closed loop system. In other words, their own kits could only be tested in their own labs, which is why there were 2 completely separate streams.
Thank you. And just using this with how we'll look on the 168 plan, why do we have the NHS and the digital platform streams then running through the centre? What are you trying to show with the plan in terms of how it all works together, please?
Certainly. As regards the NHS, at the time these plans were developed, this was testing of key workers. And very often then the key workers had to be referred into the testing portal. And so the NHS at this stage were identifying those that should be tested. So that was their part really at the front end. They played a much bigger part at the back end in relation to their national pathology system and informing citizens of the results. Because as was given in evidence earlier, individual lighthouse labs did not process personal or clinical data. So we had to keep it separate.
Thank you. Can we then look at the more evolved version, which you're going to speak to, please? It's INQ 561552. And perhaps, my ladyship, this that we're looking at now exists as a very lengthy document that is seen in its original form and its paper form is much easier to follow. But we are having to use the digital version to ensure that everyone is able to see this in the way that we have to present exhibits. But I know that the preference for Deloitte would have been a physical copy of the document, and I think, out of fairness, that's important I make that point.
It's so big, I'm afraid, Mr. Cookhouse. Trying to look at it at lunchtime. We didn't have enough people with long enough arms, I'm afraid. But it is a very impressive document in hard copy.
Well, it's horrendous, my lady. It's 9 foot by 3 foot.
I said impressive, you said horrendous, fine.
I'm talking about the scale. It's 9 foot by 3 foot in order to make it legible, actually. So it's very difficult, but.
Thank you. And certainly these long arms were assisting in the process. Let's then please, and I'm very, very grateful to the assistance of Lawrence, can we first of all please expand the first 3 boxes? Thank you.
And Ms. Cartwright, may I just have a brief overview,
sorry, can we take
just to explain what
Thank
it is that people are looking at? You don't necessarily need to read the boxes at this stage.
Mr. Cook, perhaps can you assist us all looking at is a complete piece of work, the description you'd wish to give to help us when we look, and certainly when others can expand the boxes, to give an overview about what we're looking at and what we see, please.
Yes, certainly. This, in major programme speak, is very much the architecture of the programme. what is it that needs to come together in order for the end result to be achieved, the end result being a national testing programme. Very early on, we identified the expertise that would be needed in order to bring together so many different component parts to this testing programme. We had the 4 horizontals that we have just been through, but there are also on this chart, which we'll see in more detail in the next slides, there are 10 verticals as well. But we identified very early on the expertise that we would need to bring to bear, healthcare and pharmaceutical expertise, including regulation. Good example there is looking at the instructions for the test kits, supply chains, digital strategy and transformation, cybersecurity, data analysis, logistics, sourcing and procurement, operational design, project management, real estate, and workforce planning, some 11, and there were subsequently more disciplines, 11 different disciplines. So we drew those teams from across Deloitte's public and private sector practices in order to come together to formulate this end-to-end plan. And we also formulated right at the start the principles that we needed to work by. And if I may, we very much adopted a build, run, and improve approach to life. We stressed the importance of cybersecurity and data protection, and we knew that everything that was created needed to be scalable, resilient, and modular. So the last point I would, or perhaps penultimate point I would make on this slide is the modular nature of it. We knew things were going to happen and changes would need to be made. This plan would need to evolve. A good example of that, my lady, is at this stage there were regional test sites, the drive-through things, but the local test sites, the walk-through sites, had yet to be developed. And so we were able to neatly introduce the local test sites into this plan. It had a number of benefits.
We'll come back to make sure we cover everything, but can I, just in looking at this as a sort of bird's eye view, the Randox stream at the bottom, would it be fair to say that that almost mirrors, by way of the process, the Kingfisher stream at the top? But when we look at this, in reality, Deloitte were not involved in the Randox stream. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So whilst it's there because the system has to be interoperable, Deloitte were not involved in the Randox stream.
Save to the extent at the end where the app that was spoken about earlier, the link between, or I think it was referred to as the bridge, but the link between the laboratory information management systems and the NHS MPEC system needed to be created. So at the end, we created the bridge back into the NHS.
Thank you. Now, you plainly indicated that it went through a process of refinement and change. We know this document has got a date of the 17th of June 2020. And so is it fair to say that it was around the 17th of June, this was the first time in reality where you would have this 168 plan end-to-end process? Or if there was an earlier date, can you help us be clear about when this 168 plan was effective for the first time?
Well, I would say from the 25th of March onwards, the first iteration that you showed, clearly thinking evolved, but that was the initial plan, and we needed to, in order to mobilize the required supply chain, we needed to act on that as a plan immediately.
So there's no ambiguity. The first plan we looked at, the draft, that was effective as of the 25th of March. The process of refinement was taking place, but this was the process as at the 17th of June with the 168 end-to-end plan.
That was the process for PCR testing, yes.
Thank you. Now, in the last few minutes before we take our break, can you, using this bird's eye view, just give the clarity then as to how the NHS stream and the digital stream then works together with the stream that you did have a role in, namely the Thermo Fisher kits. So in reality, the top green stream is what's happening in the Lighthouse labs. And can you just assist us in understanding at a high level how the Kingfisher stream of work of the end-to-end processing of the tests in the Lighthouse labs, the places where it connects with the NHS stream and the digital platform. And we'll look at the individual slides, but I'd just like a top-level description about why we see it as streams, please.
Okay, certainly. The green boxes relate to things the citizens or subjects needed to do. And so the first set of green boxes in the blue horizontal, which is the NHS one, related to what I touched upon, key workers being referred into for testing. Referred into testing in the next sort of green boxes in the yellow background is the digital horizontal, and that's where citizens would ring up, they would give their details, they would be able to book a test, and all of that digital infrastructure was linked into all of the test sites. So we were aware what test sites had what capacity and when, and that enabled the citizen to book the test site at a particular site where there was capacity and then be issued with a QR code. The NHS then gets re-involved and re-engaged towards the end of the horizontal in the light blue boxes, which relate to data. And that's where the data from the tests then gets reintroduced to the NHS.
Is that right at the end of the NHS stream in the light blue, in the blue stream? Sorry, it's difficult. There's a little bit of light blue in the yellow boxes, but there is the turquoise in the NHS stream, and that relates to the analysis, because the analysis was all for the local decision-making and for the putting of the test result onto the citizen's GP record. Thank you. And just with that still, thank you, that could just be highlighted again, please. Thank you. And so just so we understand the practical process, particularly in the context with the helpful evidence we've had from Professor Malloy, his evidence is they scan the barcode and get the result, whether it's positive, negative or void. But then a thing has to happen to get the result through the NPEX system to the individual that's then going to notify the patient. So can you just help us as to the process using this plan as to the role Deloitte had for getting the results back to the patient, and then what that meant for contact tracing also, and what would happen next?
Yes, when a system went to a test site, a citizen went to a test site, they showed their QR code, people in the room may recall this, to the operatives at the test site. That was then married up to the barcode on the test that the individual was asked to take. The test then went off to the lab. The lab registered the barcode on the test. That barcode and the result from the test then got uploaded to that lab's, called LIMS, Lab Information Management System, which in turn, through the Deloitte Lab app, got uploaded into NHS NPEX system. The NPEX system then moved that result to something called NHS BSA, which is the Business Services Authority, basically the arm in the NHS that pumped out the emails to the citizens.
Thank you. Ladies, is that a convenient place? We will be doing more analysis of this plan, but perhaps now is the time to take a break. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I shall return at past.
Thank you.
Surprise.
Thank you, my lady. Please can we return to the end-to-end process, please, 561552. Thank you. Mr. Cook, unless there's anything by way of overview evidence you wish to give, I intend now to work through the top stream and go through the slides to hopefully help illuminate on the process. Is there any other overview evidence that we need to understand before looking at the individual slides?
One quick thing, if I may. This process, this plan was very important because it provided a structure to integrate the material flows, the citizen flows, and the data flows of information. All of these aspects are incredibly important to building a supply chain. I talked about the modular aspect of it.
Mr. Cook, sorry to interrupt. I think I'm going to interrupt you just to be absolutely clear, so there's no cross purposes. What you mean, first of all, by a material flow?
Yes, all of the kits.
Thank you.
The testing kits and the infrastructure that goes with testing, be it the labs, be it the regional test sites, local test sites, and the like.
Thank you. And then, just so that there's no ambiguity, when you mean a citizen flow?
What the citizen has to do in order to go from booking a test to swab to it being tested and receiving the result.
Thank you. And sorry, I then interrupted you. You were, I think, going to make another point.
Yes, and it was also good because it was the map around which efforts would coalesce. And it was also, as it turned out, a very powerful communications tool within Victoria, the headquarters of the DHSC, to show people, including ministers, what it is we were seeking to collectively achieve to build the national programme.
Thank you. And so you're referencing the description assistance you're giving us and the inquiry with this plan. When was this plan presented at Victoria? Can you give us some idea, and also to who it was presented?
Because it was a living artefact, and so almost anyone who came in to visit Victoria, if they were a stakeholder with an interest in understanding shorthand, the mechanics of the national testing, we would show them this plan, and then they would understand the 4 horizontals and the 10 verticals and how they all came together.
Thank you. And so we're all absolutely clear. It's right, isn't it, that Deloitte's had essentially rooms or a space within Victoria itself when you were running the national testing programme? Part of it, I should say, not running it. I don't.
We were very much a part of it, and we were integrated as one team with civil servants, the NHS, the military. There was a military cell embedded there, broader civil servants, and other private sector contractors. We were but one part.
Thank you. And so the inquiry is going to hear evidence from Lord Bethel and Mr. Hancock. And so we can be absolutely clear in our understanding that they would have seen and understood the 168 plan end to end.
I mean, I can't comment firsthand, but I'd be very surprised if it hadn't been explained to them, or it had been explained to them there was an end-to-end plan to develop the thing that became the national testing programme.
Thank you. So let's now please expand the first 3 top horizontal boxes, please. Now, the text can be read at this font size, I hope. And so can you just explain this first aspect of the plan, please?
Certainly, this is the Kingfisher kit top aspect, and the blue boxes all relate to the logistics. May I ask for it to be made slightly bigger, please?
Could it be expanded, please? Thank you.
Thank you. So going left to right, I mean, broadly says what it does on the tin in terms of the manufacture of the test kits. There is a misconception that the test kit came from the manufacturer all boxed, ready to go. This was not indeed the case. Very often, test kits comprised anywhere between 7 and 9 component parts, and that varied from channel to channel. So sometimes test kits came with multiple parts together, other times all the parts were single. Hence the reference to assembly of test kits, consumables, and then once they had been assembled, they were transported to the particular warehouse, which is the next box along. If we could then move to the next.
Yeah, and just pausing there so we can understand practically. So is it that Deloitte are ensuring that all the parts that are needed are in place and working together? Because I want us to understand at any point, is Deloitte actually, for example, procuring the test kits? And just so we're absolutely clear exactly what of these slides we know, yes, we can say, rather than the logistics and the flow that Deloitte were doing.
Certainly. It was absolutely the logistics element. But in addition, we had teams who were working with the lighthouse labs, where you heard earlier in the evidence there were issues with some of the kits. So yes, we did have a hand in making sure that the kits came together, but we didn't at any stage have a hand in the regulatory approval of those kits. That wasn't our role.
Thank you. Can we then expand the next slide along, please? Thank you. Mr. Cook, do you want to speak to this part of the process, please?
Yes. Once, obviously, the manufacture had happened and the kits had been put together, they then went to particular either warehouses and packed up for bulk delivery. They could have been delivered to institutions. They may have been organisations, care homes, or indeed prisons. And then the bottom 3 boxes relates to kits being sent from the warehouse to the individual test sites, which at these sites, this time, were predominantly the regional test sites, the drive-throughs.
And so we can see the process, but I think the slides make clear that in terms of delivery partners, warehouse and the like, that these are separate contracts that individuals are doing for that, but you're making sure that it all fits together and works and flows.
Correct. And we had a hand in assisting the DHSC put those contracts in place. We did not put them in place.
Thank you. Now, I think that is the first 3 horizontals. Can we then move to boxes 4 and 5 on the Kingfisher flow, please? Thank you. And so we've got step 3. Mr. Cook, do you want to speak to step 3?
Yes. Step 3 relates to the kits being delivered to either individuals' homes or individual organisations. Again, that could have been a care home, a prison, or the like. And then moving into the green flows, and the green, as I mentioned earlier, was what the citizens were doing. They would actually administer the test either themselves or by institution staff, depending on where the kits had actually ended up, all against agreed protocols.
Thank you. And can I ask you perhaps then to assist with practical examples, please, Mr. Cook? The inquiry has, through the Every Story Matters record, examples of individuals saying how far they had to travel to get a test and being offered tests a long way away from where they lived. Again, this is a summary. And it's part of some of the evidence that has been heard or seen in the statements from the bereaved. Is what Deloitte is doing is essentially looking where you had tests or slots at regional test centres and then allocating those available slots to the members of the public. Is that what you were doing?
If I may take a step back, we were identifying the location of the regional test sites and subsequently the local test sites. And in terms of identifying the locations, we had our real estate team conduct some geospatial modelling as to percentage of the population catchment you would get between a 15-minute, 30-minute, 45-minute and 60-minute drive. And so that in one part drove the location of the regional test sites. There were other characteristics that had to be met as well.
Thank you. And sorry, I interrupted you before you were going to move on to the step 4 and the green boxes on the end-to-end testing process where we've got the test having been administered. And perhaps do you want to speak to that slide of programme of works, please?
Yes, certainly. There was a system whereby the subject either conducts the test at home for the top layer of boxes, and then makes sure that it gets sent back per the instructions in each of the test kits to the test site, or indeed a member of staff at the institution may conduct the test on them. A good example of that would be care homes for the elderly or those with other issues that may give rise to difficulty in testing.
Thank you. And just as we're seeing this process as to how it's meant to flow in practice, and we've referenced test sites, can I ask you, were Deloitte part of the work streams that ensured that test sites were fully accessible? Because again, in the Every Story Matter record and in the impact video we heard, We've had examples of individuals who were given slots at particular test sites and we've had certain disabilities or access requirements. And then when they got there, they were not able to access testing because the testing site did not accommodate their particular needs, and them having flagged those as part of the booking of the test. And so are we able to understand, was that something that Deloitte practically were managing through this end-to-end process?
Very much so. Accessibility was one of the core principles in which we looked to build in to the design of the test sites, both regional test sites, the drive-throughs, and local test sites for the individuals. I believe we have submitted in evidence the handbooks and the mobilisation handbooks we produced for those sites, which underpin the importance of accessibility.
Thank you. And so can you perhaps then help us understand in those examples we've already heard evidence from at the beginning of the inquiry, what will have fallen down in the process if an individual, when booking a test, is asked to go to a site where it was accessible, understood that when they arrived there they'd be able to access a test, but because of their disability, the site actually wasn't able to even accommodate the needs and adjustments having been told they were. So where had it fallen down then in the booking process?
One of the particular accounts was of a chap in a wheelchair with cerebral palsy.
I think is it that in the impact video? I think that was
yes,
Dean, yes.
Yes, and where the place he was taken wasn't wheelchair accessible and he was not assisted in the taking of the test. I think the system fell down there in the making sure there was step-free access and wheelchair accessibility in the particular location, and all locations were supposed to have individuals trained to assist those who were unable to take the test themselves, with a particular focus on the local test sites, less so the drive-ins.
Thank you. Is there anything else you want to say about this slide before we move to the next boxes, the next last three boxes?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Can we move along then, please, to the last three boxes on the Kingfisher row, please? Thank you. Now, Mr. Cook, can you please assist us with any particular expansion you wish to give us about step 4B?
Yes, that's where the regional test site, which were the drive-through test sites, you went along and you showed your QR code, which you'd got from the front end of the digital stream, as I explained earlier, and then you conducted the test yourself. It could be conducted on you if you needed help, and you conducted the test if you had children, which was another benefit of the drive-through sites.
Thank you. And then if we look at step 5, please. Thank you.
Yes, that is where the kits were then transported and boxed appropriately from the place where the test had taken place, be it a test site or an institution, and then that was sent off to the labs, which is the next step.
Thank you. And then if we can go to that next step, please, step 6.
This is the central laboratories, basically the lighthouse labs that we've heard a fair amount on today already.
Thank you. And then if we could please then display the digital platform boxes 5 and 7, please. I think the third horizontal.
Thank you. This shows the tracking of what the citizen needed to do, or indeed key worker at this stage, in terms of booking a test and having their identity verified at the test centre.
Thank you. And I think you identified before we broke, what was the name of the digital system that Deloitte created for managing this process?
Well, there were a number of systems, but we were calling it the testing portal.
Testing portal, thank you. And then if we could move along, please, to the third horizontal in the digital platform boxes 5 and 7.
Again, this is where you get the registering of your particular test through the scanning of a QR code when you arrived at the test site.
Thank you. And then I think, finally, please, could I ask for the vertical of the last two boxes of horizontals 2, 3 and 4 to be displayed?
This is very important, because this is where there was a excuse me, a handoff to the NHS. Of the result from the labs. All of the Lighthouse labs, as we heard earlier, had the same information management system. That then went through the Deloitte app, to the existing NHS NPEX, National Pathology Exchange, that then downloaded to the BSA, which is an NHS organisation, Business Services Authority, which then communicated not only to the citizen, but and that was the green boxes to the right, but the turquoise above it related to some of the analytics that was then undertaken for that data in terms of the type of results, the geographical locations, and also that was where the GPs were informed of the citizen's result.
Thank you. And just leaving this displayed, in particular having followed the data flow, was there any mechanism or system that enabled the results and the data that maybe identified hotspots and the like for the directors of public health who operated in local authorities to access the data being harvested as to the results and what they may show, yes, particularly locally?
Deloitte developed another digital platform, which is the Operational Information Management Platform, OMIP, which is summarised in the back of my statement. That operational management platform was, I would say, the single source of truth, and that had all of the data relating to the testing activity, including results, locations, regions, and the like. Access to that platform was granted by the DHSC, and typically, obviously the DHSC, government departments, the devolved administrations, and some local authorities. There were over 1,000 organisations in the end that could access OMIP and a series of reports on that platform.
Thank you. And so can you help us to who would have to give permission to the local authorities to access the data on the OMIP system?
Someone in the DHSC, I'm unsighted as to who.
Thank you, but they didn't automatically get access to OMIP?
No, that wouldn't have been wise.
And then can I ask you, because you've identified OMIP being the single source of truth, is it correct that the OMIP system has been essentially, it no longer exists?
It was decommissioned in, I believe, August 22.
Thank you. And is essentially the data, the information that sat on the OMIP system, was that retained before it was decommissioned?
I would be very surprised if it was not retained by NHSX. Deloitte did not retain a copy.
And can you assist as to why Deloitte did not retain a copy?
It wasn't our data.
Thank you. Now, is there anything else on the end-to-end process? I appreciate that a lot of care has gone into the production of the document, but is there any aspect of that end-to-end process that you wish to illuminate before we move on to another topic?
No, perhaps just to underscore the importance of very early on, going to what you said, Melody, of having a plan around which all efforts could coalesce.
Some poor soul or souls in Deloitte had to produce this very complicated document. How was it used? So a plan, I understand, but I'm quite used to narrative rather than graphs. I'm not or pictorial representation. How was it used for the plan to be developed? Was it informative? Was it trying to get people to focus on what was the purpose of it?
I think the primary benefit actually related to the testing project Cube at this stage, and indeed Tesseract, was broken into a series of work streams. So at its height, there were 42 work streams on Cube, which married to areas within this plan. And we arranged a stand-up meeting for all of those concerned to understand how this end-to-end plan was coming together every day at 9 a.m. every day at 9 a.m. where you had representatives from the NHS, the DHSC, there were Deloitte folk, other private sector suppliers, representatives from the devolved nations to understand what the activity that had gone on the days before and the planned activity for that day and how it married up to this plan.
Thank you. Can I please remove the 168 end-to-end plan from the screen, please? And having already asked you about the ability for access from the relevant directors of public health to the data, could you assist with a further document you've helpfully provided, and thank you, which is the spreadsheet, which was the Deloitte London Engagement Local Testing Tracker, please. It's 5867599. I hope that may be a rogue reference, sorry. 587, sorry, 599. Maybe if we could zoom in, please. Oh, maybe not. But perhaps we'll look at the detail in a moment, but Mr. Cook, can you just give us some context to what we're looking at and what the piece of work that was done, particularly in London, around engagement and a local testing tracker, please?
Yes. This was in relation to both the number and location of local test sites. It was important that we engaged with local authorities and local charities to understand the requirements of particular populations. And so this particular tracker tracks by borough all of the population issues and challenges that local authorities had, and they made recommendations, the local authorities that is, as to both number and location of local test site. There are some quotes as to the rationale, but it really related to where elements of the population in that borough had particular vulnerabilities, and therefore it was sensible to cite a local test centre as close to those population sites as possible.
Thank you. We can see the objectives there and goals being helping testing to be more demand-led by communicating the testing options to directors of public health and so on. But can we scroll down, please? Because I think, pausing there, thank you, we can see that the total directors of public health engaged, it says, so we've got 153 and we've got 100% as the comment. But can you help me understand this document? Because if we scroll down, it actually looks like it was only London that was engaged. We've no other data for other directors of public health beyond the London region. So
this was our London engagement tracker. We had individuals by region appointed to do a similar exercise as this, but I suspect not quite to the same level of granularity, borough by borough for every major city, but not all cities are clearly demarcated.
No, and that's what I want your help with, because certainly this spreadsheet suggests we've got total authorities engaged, we've got 21% out of, so 33 out of 155 authorities. And what I want to understand is whether, in fact, it was only London boroughs that were consulted in the Directors of Public Health, or whether that would be an unfair assumption.
That would certainly be an unfair assumption. And the reason for that is that we had Deloitte team members liaising with local authorities throughout the nation to understand where these test sites should be located. And I suppose the proof point of that would be a lot of the local test sites were actually located in local authority buildings, be they leisure centres and libraries and the like.
Okay. And so are you able to assist us why then only the London data was input into this spreadsheet rather than a piece of work that gives essentially the engagement across directors of public health and all of the authorities?
Certainly. This was an addendum to the evidence request that I received from the inquiry relatively late on, so we thought it was helpful to give an example, and it is only an example, of the level of engagement with local authorities. The team that we deployed were all ex-local authority or social care workers.
When you say the team that we deployed, can we just be
So
clear?
in London, so we had a local engagement team, as it was called, to support the work of the siting of the local test centres, and those people between them had often 10, 20 years experience working with local authorities, so they could get the value from the local authorities as to the needs of their population.
Thank you. And then expanding that beyond London, was there local engagement teams then with each of the local authorities as to where to site their regional testing centres?
There were teams by region, not necessarily by city.
No. Can I then ask you for some evidence that the inquiry's already heard linked to the setting up of a testing centre in Cardiff, where you'll be aware of the evidence I think that was given, that it was said that the local public health had no knowledge that the testing centre was being set up in Cardiff. Just to, I suppose, we'll get your perspective or evidence on behalf of Deloitte about that, or then if that evidence is accurate from Deloitte's position as to how it could be that a testing centre was set up in a major city without the local public health knowing it was being sited there.
Yes. To answer that question, I'd briefly go into the process around how one of these regional test centres test sites was actually opened. Our real estate team, I talked about the geospatial modelling and the drive times and the like. This was in a city, so we therefore, rather than drive times, we were looking at population density around particular sites. There were also other prerequisites such as area, space, and the like, and traffic issues that also had to be taken into account. That resulted in a one-page recommendation document being produced for every regional test site and every local test site. That one-page document then had to be approved by the DHSC. Communications with devolved nations was the purview of the DHSC and not Deloitte. The local authority in Cardiff was aware of this because they actually owned the site. This is the local authority, not the health authorities. They owned the site because they signed off on a variation of the sublease.
Thank you. Can I then please ask you about the regional testing sites? Perhaps if we could have displayed, please, from your statement, paragraph 86, please. And sorry, the INQ, I do apologise, is 587306. Thank you. You also touch upon the regional testing sites a little later at paragraph 98, but essentially you explain Deloitte's role in setting up these regional testing sites and the local testing sites, and just pausing there, essentially the regional testing sites would probably need a car. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas
yes.
the local testing sites were those really to cater for individuals that didn't have transport and would be able to access them on foot.
Correct. And as part of, if one looked back, I'm not suggesting we do, but if we look back at the tracker, part of the local engagement was to understand also the percentage of population that owned a vehicle.
Thank you. Now, essentially this paragraph and the later one talks about how that Deloitte had identified the need to increase test site availability and population coverage. And it's also said that Deloitte conducted data modelling to analyse the number of sites that would be required. Can you assist us, please, with understanding how were locations for testing sites selected, and was consideration given to identifying and targeting areas of likely poor access or otherwise low uptake, and was any data analysis undertaken to facilitate this? Apologies that there's 4 questions rolled up, but I hope essentially it can be considered under the theme of accessibility and consideration for sites.
Yes, hopefully I'll get them perhaps not in the right order. There were 3 primary types of testing. The regional test sites I've just touched upon, really, there was a set of criteria that had to be satisfied in order for a location for a regional test site to be recommended, including the drive times and the percentage of population. Again, that resulted in a one-pager being sent to the DHSC for either agreement or a request to find a different site. on local test sites. Both the number and location were always recommended by the local authorities. That then fed into the equivalent one-pager, and obviously many of these were going to the DHSC, certainly for local test sites, regularly. And then there were the things called the MTUs, the mobile test units, of which eventually there were over 500, and they were sent to areas of sparser population.
Thank you. And then can we just understand, you've obviously described that they would go to the DHSC, and so when they're going to the DHSC, who is it essentially that is part of the DHSC team that's getting this input? Is there a set team? Are there set individuals?
There would have been a set team, but I'm unsighted as to the identity or the name of that team.
No, thank you. And then can I ask you just on the same topic, did data modelling take account of the demographics of populations to analyse levels of uptake amongst different communities and target interventions accordingly?
Yes, in terms of a number of different demographics. Certainly you will see some examples as the rationale on the tracker in relation to BAME community, those who were digitally excluded, those who were disabled. A number of demographics were considered in the siting, certainly of the local test sites, the ones that you didn't need a vehicle to get to. Thank you.
Could paragraph 119 of your statement, it's page 35 of 587306 be displayed, please? You've given evidence in this paragraph and the following one around mobile testing units, and you tell us that Deloitte's role in setting up mobile testing units to test key workers. Can you assist any further than that which is detailed in your statement as to any specific efforts made to improve the accessibility of testing for and encourage uptake amongst ethnic minority healthcare workers, please?
There was a separate work stream called Satellites and Vulnerable Communities, and there was a concerted effort to speak with NHS organisations so that they could identify key workers. I don't know whether they did it by particular demographic, but the key workers that needed to be tested.
Thank you. Now, can I ask you some specific questions around the lighthouse labs? And can I display, please, within your statement, the very helpful table at page 37 in paragraph 126, where the next page, 37, please. You've identified essentially the location of the lighthouse lab, the owner-operator and the launch date. And if we scroll down, please. Thank you. Over the page, we see the lighthouse laboratories that came online later. Now, the inquiry's already heard some evidence about certainly the early setting up of the Milton Keynes Lighthouse Laboratory, about evidence that was given last week from Professor McNally, essentially that indicated that there was a large volume of Deloitte consultants that were present. And so can I ask for your evidence about the numbers of contractors that would be physically present at the Lighthouse Laboratories as they were being set up? And I appreciate from the evidence we've heard today from Professor Malloy, it may have depended on requirements because he's talked about the lean-in from AstraZeneca at the site in Cheshire.
Yeah. May I just distinguish between Deloitte resources and third-party contractors? They are different. But if you're asking the question how many Deloitte resources, which I think you are, were at Milton Keynes, I read that evidence and I believe the figure, the word used was enormous.
Yes.
I didn't recognise that and will not surprise you that we have trackers as to who's deployed where and when. And our team at Milton Keynes varied as between 4 and 5 people, with the occasional one-off day visitor by Deloitte or from Deloitte to undertake a particular task.
Thank you.
So I didn't recognise the word enormous.
And so the full context of that answer is given. Can we please display the spreadsheet that's been provided by way of the workstream roster, 587602, please? Thank you.
There is another tab before that. If you, the
Perhaps if we go to the roster first, please. Thank you. And is it right here that we've got MKs for Milton Keynes?
Correct.
Mank, would that be essentially to reference the Cheshire site, the Alderley Park?
Correct.
Thank
Alderley
you.
Park.
Glasgow, obviously the Glasgow site. And then is London intended to be for the Cambridge site?
I can't answer that.
Let's leave those aside, but certainly I think this roster makes the point as to the number of staff at Milton Keynes, and essentially we can see 5 names attributed to Milton Keynes over certainly very early stage of the setting up of the Milton Keynes Lighthouse Lab. And is this what you're talking about as more the number of individuals operating at the Lighthouse Laboratory that fits more with your understanding?
Absolutely, but one additional point which is relevant is that Milton Keynes was very much the prototype for Lighthouse Labs. And so we had people who were at Milton Keynes but doing pan-lighthouse type work in terms of looking at standard operating procedures and the like.
Thank you. And perhaps then if we can move now to output, because again, it's helpful to see, certainly across the Milton Keynes site and the Cheshire site, we've got a first-hand look at how the number of tests during these early stages were scaled up during this relevant period. I don't intend to ask you specific questions. I think the document speaks for itself, but is there anything additionally, Mr. Cook, you wish to say about what we see as to the increasing and scaling up of the testing at the sites?
No, other than to note that the scaling happened very rapidly.
Thank you. That can be taken down, please. Can I ask you some questions where criticisms have been levelled at Deloitte, potentially by way of practices at Lighthouse Laboratories? And you will have reviewed as part of your evidence preparation the article by Sarah Block-Budzier, which is INQ 228145, and with contributions from Dr. Julian Harris. And have you had an opportunity before giving evidence, Mr. Cook, essentially to see the various criticisms that were levelled as to the operation of this being October 2020 at the site?
Yes, I have.
Essentially inexperienced colleagues, unaware of hazards, workers having limited lab experience, recruiting young people from the local area to work long shifts, concerns being escalated about training. And do you recall issues like this being raised with you relating to the Milton Keynes Lighthouse Lab?
Those issues, they would not have been raised with Deloitte, because that was all within the confines of the lab itself, and we had no oversight or responsibility. That was the oversight and responsibility, excuse me, of the operational lead, and as we heard this morning, there was a clinical lead appointed by the NHS for each of these labs. We had no clinical oversight at all.
Thank you. Can that be taken down, please? Now, I highly summarise with Professor Malloy some issues as to the state of tests when they were received from the testing sites being in a poor state, perhaps multiple barcodes, caps not being on, and leakage. And so can I ask you, for Deloitte's perspective, and I appreciate also Professor Malloy gave his context of that evidence as to early stages, but can you assist with Deloitte's view as to whether there was a problem across the Lighthouse Labs being relating to unsafe and voided tests?
I think initially there were issues, and some issues, both in relation to design of some of the swabs and vials before a common design was hit upon, which took a few months, where there were tests that were voided because for that reason we reported that to NHS clinicians, Dr. Fowler, and then there were secondary issues where the tests themselves were presented poorly. You're right, caps not screwed up properly, barcode stickers, either multiple barcode stickers on one vial or stickers put across the top of the vial. That resulted in us being able to identify the particular test site from which the test came. We then went out to each of those test sites to give additional training and support, and as I think the evidence from this morning, the situation improved.
Thank you. Can I ask then for any expansion you wish to give around the issue relating to the Amenza laboratory? And can I ask your assistance by reference to the paragraphs you've helpfully provided in your statement? It's paragraph 157 I'd like to take you to. And there's a portion of your statement where you deal with the Amenza issues. And so perhaps we don't need one necessarily to highlight, but essentially from paragraph 157 to 163, you address the issues. Paragraph 157, you say it was not part of Deloitte's scope to track or monitor these concerns, and we did not know whether any such formal responsibility existed in the programme. Are you able to expand upon that and why that wasn't within Deloitte's scope?
I can't really address why it wasn't in our scope. Our scope was set centrally within the DHSC, and it evolved over the phases. So unhelpfully, I can't tell you why it wasn't within our scope.
Thank you. And can I ask you then, we can see that paragraph 160, and as we've looked at with care today, essentially Deloitte had the oversight for the end-to-end process. But to what extent did Deloitte have the responsibility for monitoring the performance of the end-to-end process?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question.
Well, perhaps it's just to ensure that there's where you have essentially commissioned and procured to ensure that the process flows in the way we've looked at on the 168 plan. To what extent is there an audit function or a review function of Deloitte that's built into the contracts? And if that's not the position, particularly where there are issues that have or identified like a Demensa, so we can understand, did you have a role in that identification, or is it your position? No, that was for those that were operating that particular site and those particular contracts.
There were multiple layers of quality assurance over the Deloitte activity, both at the DHSC level and internally within Deloitte. We had significant governance of which I was a part over all of our activity, and then there was the clinical oversight as well. Anything of a clinical nature, we had no hand in. And again, that was a deliberate decision on our part.
Thank you. And so then can I be clear, did Deloitte have any responsibility for the what some would say relating to Amenza were poor management and inadequate systems and oversight?
That would relate to the activities within the confines of a lab. So no, we would have had no oversight on it.
Thank you. Now, thank you, that can be taken down from the screen. Can I ask you then, in terms of the design and rollout of the digital contact and trace app, did Deloitte have any role in respect of that?
No.
No, thank you. Can I ask you then, in respect of a Wales perspective, please? And I think as part of the material you've been asked to consider included the joint corporate witness statement that identified how Wales utilised dry throat swabs for investigating respiratory viral infection. And perhaps if we can display your paragraph 339, please, in your witness statement, which is INQ 587306, please, paragraph 339. Oh, I do apologise. It's the wrong reference. So that references to the context, the identification that Wales had a different test. But can I ask you, were Deloitte aware that Wales used different swabs to England? And if, first of all,
no.
No. Okay. Well, I won't ask the follow-up question.
Again, that is a clinical related question.
Thank you. Can I then ask to be displayed, please, INQ 511010. And again, I think as part of the preparatory material, this is the field laboratory site visit checklist. And this one I'm taking you to is the Glasgow mass testing site. And again, these are early in the establishment of the Lighthouse laboratory. There's a similar one for Alderley Park. Have you had an opportunity to review these reports?
Yes, I have.
And when one looks at the reports, we can see a number of concerns were raised. Were those concerns relating, for this scenario, with the Glasgow Lighthouse Laboratory shared or presented to Deloitte?
I don't know is the short answer to that, but even if they were, this related to inspections of the labs themselves and the clinical processes being undertaken within the labs, and therefore was not within our remit.
Thank you. And so then maybe that's the same answer to the follow-up questions. Again, these site visits identified staff training and, again, issues relating to PPP. Would they have fallen then for Deloitte to ensure they're improved, or is that for the operator?
That is an operational issue, and I would have expected both the operational lead and the NHS clinical lead of those labs to be on top of those issues.
Thank you. Thank you. Could I next seek your view again? I've given you an opportunity to clarify whether others have made criticisms or leveled them against Deloitte, where you clarified where it was not within the responsibility of Deloitte. The inquiry's now received a witness statement from Haruna Franklin. And can I just ask for paragraph 4.10 of the statement of Haruna Franklin, which is 587606. Thank you. So 510, please. I do apologise. Can we go back up to 4.10?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. This suggests that there was a lack of data analysis to support trace, and that a project was therefore created to improve this sitting alongside the day-to-day operations, and that Deloitte were the consultants brought in to deliver this. They created and managed the operational management information reporting to support the optimisation and continuous improvement of the test and tracing contact centres, including case creation, isolation advice and follow-ups in line with policy. I've already asked you about to what extent did Deloitte have responsibility for the contact tracing centres. This is another criticism that suggests being levelled to Deloitte in respect of contact tracing. Is this accurate at all in terms of any role Deloitte had for the contact tracing, please?
Is it a criticism, or is it saying there was a problem and Deloitte are brought in to solve it?
Well, perhaps that's... Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I got there.
I couldn't have put it better myself.
Can I say I fully agree with that? And so could I ask you to answer the leadership question? Did you have any input in terms of being brought in to address a contact tracing issue?
I wouldn't have characterised it as it's been characterised in this statement, because it suggests that we set various things up, had a management system of a type. The NHS had already had something called a Microsoft Power BI system, which was actually the business intelligence. That's what the BI stands for. What we were asked to do was extract some data and run some reports. That was it.
Thank you. Thank you. That can be taken down, please. Just excuse me just one moment. Thank you. I do apologise. Can I then please have displayed, again, back to your witness statement, and it's paragraph 298, please. That's I&Q 587306. Now, this is a portion of questions I just want to ask you to see if you can assist us with any further evidence about vulnerabilities and considerations of issues of inequality. Paragraph 298, you detailed that Deloitte was not involved in defining what vulnerable meant. However, you understood the term to have been interpreted more broadly than just those groups protected under the Equality Act 2010. You detail that when making testing policy decisions, the government took into account, for example, protected characteristics, geographical and socio-economic differences, occupations and or immigration status. And so could I ask you, did Deloitte conduct or have sight of any equality impact assessments in relation to Deloitte's role in building the national testing programme?
As I understand it, is the responsibility of the local authorities to run such impact assessments, although we did support on some of those impact assessments in some locations.
Thank you. Can we then have displayed, please, your paragraph 300 on the next page, page 79, please? Thank you. And could it be expanded? Thank you. You detail that the national testing programme having initiatives such as community-led testing, the design of an anonymous testing journey for asylum seekers and refugees, and designing a testing journey for the digitally excluded. Could you assist at all, Mr. Cook, with how success was measured in respect of these initiatives? And the follow-up question would be, was the data monitored and evaluated to implement targeted interventions?
I am unaware of any statistics that we ran as to the success, and that would have been left to the local authorities to feed back to our local engagement teams.
Thank you. Can we then move to the next paragraph, paragraph 301, please? Again, you identify that Deloitte consulted with local authorities to seek advice and guidance on how to approach the needs of vulnerable communities, and that this assisted Deloitte in its thinking as to how to make testing more accessible to these vulnerable groups. Can you assist or provide any further description as to the measures taken to engage with and involve representatives from ethnic minority organisations and communities to understand their needs, address their concerns and build trust?
I think that the best way to answer that is some of the rationale in the London Borough engagement tracker that tracked where percentages of the community from a BAME background were located, and we then worked closely with the local authorities to understand the needs of that particular community and other communities in the siting and the number of sites, test sites.
Thank you. There's then a portion of your statement just following on at, maybe we could go to the next page, please, at page 80, and if it could perhaps be left rather than zooming in, because it's the paragraphs 304 through to 309 on page 80. And so you're detailing within this run of paragraphs, Mr. Cook, please, that the Department of Health and Social Care's population engagement study managed by Deloitte consider behavioural issues and the impact those behaviours may have on the rates of testing. Are you able to assist any further, please, on how the considerations around health inequalities, particularly those affecting ethnic minority communities, were factored into this study?
We looked at a number of data sets and worked closely with local authorities. I can't give you any more information than that.
Thank you. That can be taken down, please. Again, a few more questions, please, Mr. Cook, to explore, see if you can help any further. In light of the impact of the pandemic on ethnic minority communities, were there specific strategies developed or actions taken to ensure that testing services were tailored to the needs of these communities, especially those with higher levels of vulnerability or systemic barriers to accessing healthcare?
All questions and issues of strategy and approach were made by others. It goes back to the how, not the what or the why, as I started my evidence. So if they were communicated to us and with a how question at the end of it, we would have addressed it.
Thank you. And has Deloitte learnt any lessons that assists the inquiry's consideration of the unequal impacts of the testing regime on ethnic minority communities and the actions that should be taken to prevent such inequalities in a future testing programme?
Certainly, as far as Deloitte is concerned, we worked very hard through our local engagement teams to make sure that we understood the demographics of populations and that test sites were located in the most convenient places for those populations.
Thank you. And can I ask, just building on that, did local community views and economic factors such as cost of travelling to testing sites inform the location of the testing sites and facility layout?
I'm unaware that cost of travel specifically was. We did look at percentage of car ownership by 1,000 of population.
Thank you. Can I ask to be displayed, please, INQ 48405, which is a statement of Professor Fenton, I think, that's been provided to you. That's INQ 48405. Apologies if that's a rogue reference. Thank you. And can we move, please, to paragraph 31 within the statement? And can I just check, Mr. Cook, you haven't had an opportunity to consider Professor Fenton's statement?
This was in my evidence pack.
Thank you. Can we move then, please, to paragraph 31 on page 9? Thank you. You can see there in the early weeks of the pandemic, local public health teams under directives of public health put in place structures key to containing infectious disease, such as contact tracing. As numbers increased, this was taken away and put onto a national digital platform, which was inconsistent, leading to ambiguity and individual decision-making. As this was scaled up, there was a lack of public health specialists involved in large-scale test and trace operations. I think the reality is you were not involved in the contact tracing app, so you cannot assist any further with this particular question.
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you. That can be taken from the screen, please. Can I then move to my penultimate topic before recommendations? And it is to address the issue of costs. And as I'm no doubt been well aware, there's been much detailed about cost linked to the contractors and the testing programme. And I think you detail within your witness statement the total cost of the various and many contracts. But can I thank you and Deloitte for the provision of a more detailed breakdown of the finances of these contracts? And can that be displayed now, please, which is INQ 587597. Thank you. And if it could just be expanded, please. So if we go to the bottom figure, first of all, where we see the total cost of the Deloitte's involvement in the various contracts is the 395,477,576. But it's right, isn't it, that you've helpfully assisted with the breakdown of the cost of the individual contracts. And can we go to the top of that, please? Excuse me. Thank you. Which is we've heard a little evidence, I think, in terms of the first 3 months of setting up the national testing work stream, which is the 3-month period we can see for the 19th of March of 2020 to the 19th of June of 2020, where 32 million was charged for that 3-month period. And can I ask you to give whatever relevant evidence you'd wish to give, please, Mr. Cook, so we have a proper context to the figures we see here, but also the rates at which the Deloitte contractors were performing their role, please.
Certainly. Very early on in our engagement, I believe on the 25th of March, Deloitte suggested to the Cabinet Office that we use an existing Crown Commercial Service framework, MCF2, as was in those days, and we used those rates against which we applied a very significant discount as a suggested way forward, as we had already started work without a contract day one and without agreement as to rates. The Cabinet Office came back and responded, and our offer for that discount was until May of that year, because at that stage no one knew the sort of longevity of the pandemic. That they agreed with the level of discount, but we didn't keep it until May. We kept it until, with one adjustment, until the end of our involvement.
Thank you. That can be removed from the screen. And perhaps out of a fairness point to evidence that the inquiry is going to hear, I know you've had an opportunity to consider the statement of Professor Pillay, who we'll hear from on the last day of the inquiry, but I think it's a criticism that others have made that is to the effect that Deloitte did not have relevant expertise in respect of the involvement in the testing programme. And is there anything you'd wish to say for when we hear those later criticisms about Deloitte's absence of relevant expertise, please?
Well, I wouldn't agree with the characterisation of that relevant expertise. Did we deploy virologists? No, that was not our role. We look at a lab operation more as a lean manufacturing process. We had a number of very directly relevant skills, as I believe I highlighted. I highlighted 11 different skills that help create the 168 plan. There was criticism that some of the scientific community had to explain the science to some of the Deloitte people. Frankly, I would have been appalled had our people not asked those questions. We were involved in some workforce planning. We needed to know the workforce that was needed for each of the satellite labs. We needed to know what health and safety aspects needed to be built in to the workflow and the supply chain. So I would have been very surprised had those conversations not taken place.
Thank you. And then for my purposes, please, Mr. Cook, there's been a good degree of lessons learning and recommendation that's...
Well, unless there's, given the time, Ms. Cartwright, sorry to interrupt you, unless there are any points you wish to highlight or Mr. Cook wish to highlight, if they're just coming from the written statement, I can read them.
They are, and that's what I just wanted. I wasn't going to go to them, but whether anything else that Mr. Cook would wish to expand upon.
I would like to just end on one final point. This was an unbelievable national effort. Colleagues from the NHS, the DHSC, other civil servants, the military, academia, other private sector suppliers all came together as one team. Deloitte was but one part of a monumental national effort.
Thank you. Thank you for answering my questions. Thank you.
Ms. Parsons, I don't know how much your thunder Ms. Cartwright's stolen. Can you see Ms. Cartwright around the pillar? Right.
I can. Yes.
Most of the fund has been stolen, but I do have a couple of brief matters, if I may.
Certainly.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Cook. I ask questions on behalf of the COVID-19 bereaved families for Justice Cymru. I want to ask you about the regional testing site in Cardiff City Stadium, which has been touched on, so we can deal with it very briefly, I hope. You say in your witness statement at paragraph 86 that Deloitte was involved in the identification and building of the regional testing sites. Whose instruction was it, please, to get it set up in Cardiff City Stadium?
We were asked to identify nationally sites to cover as much of the population as possible. We had a set of criteria that we were working to in terms of location, hard standing area, parking and the like. Once we found a site that met those criteria, as I mentioned, we created this one-page recommendation which went to the DHSC, and it was either signed off or we were asked to find alternative sites. So were we told Cardiff City precisely? I would very much doubt that. We were scouting sites that were available.
And if I may, who did it go to in the DHSC?
I think I mentioned earlier, there would have been a team there because the number of these things, these one-pagers requests for both regional and local test sites went to, I don't know the names of the individuals, I'm sorry.
Thank you. We know that Public Health Wales and the Welsh Government first heard about the centre having been set up on the 1st of April. That was one day before it was due to become operational. You said in your evidence that DHSC was responsible for communications with the devolved administrations. Do we take it that you can't help with why there was no apparent engagement with the Welsh Government or Public Health Wales?
I'm afraid I cannot help with that question.
And lastly, please, Mr. Cook, we know from Public Health Wales' witness statement to the inquiry that the Deloitte model, as they called it, was not fit for purpose initially in Wales. And so it was stood down on the 2nd of April, albeit later again stood up. There were a number of problems that were identified. One of them related to the swab methodology. You've already touched on that. But I wanted to ask you about another couple of problems that were identified. Test results would not be available on patient records in Wales. And as a result, there was a lack of visibility of test results, such that the Welsh Government could not manage the disease in the population. So as to those more operational issues rather than clinical issues, did Deloitte have any discussion with Cardiff City Council about those type of issues? And if not, why not?
The results, if I may take you back to that end-to-end 168-step plan, would have been communicated right at the end through the NHS's MPEX system. So by that time, Deloitte had no hand in where that data went. That was an NHS responsibility, as neither the test sites nor Deloitte were going to process that data.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cook.
Thank you,
my
Ms.
lady.
Parsons. That concludes the questions we have for you, Mr. Cook. I hope you won't consider it an insult, but dare I say it, the care with which you gave your evidence betrays your lawyerly beginnings and qualification. I don't consider it an insult because I'm proud of being a lawyer, but other people may. Thank you very much indeed for the help that you and your team have given to the inquiry. I appreciate the amount of time it must have been taken for the Deloitte team to prepare your witness statement and to be here today. And also thank you to the Deloitte team who worked on this programme. I do understand what you say about this huge number of people who are involved, coming from all sorts of different groups. And I do understand, of course, that technically the Deloitte team weren't volunteers, but I bet you they worked even harder, and I've no doubt Deloitte worked them pretty hard. I bet they worked even harder when they were working on this programme because it was so worthwhile. So thank you for everything they did and the team at Deloitte did.
My lady, thank you very much for those observations. I will certainly pass that back, but thank you.
Well, not the bit about you're working them too hard at the beginning. But
no, I might ignore that.
Thank you very much. I shall return at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
Thank you, my lady.
All rise.